Joseph Campbell, who probably is the greatest defender and articulator of myths in our time, has talked a lot about the making of myth, since he feels that is, again, a natural capacity of man, which is always in operation. And to be instructed by the old myths, to know our history, and to know the universality of that, but also to ask, what is the myth of this time? And I happened to hear him several weeks after the moon landing. And I've never seen a man, he was probably in his late 60s at the time, in such a state of ecstasy. He kept saying, we've got it, we've got it, we've got it. It's the new myth. Something about the landing on the moon. We talked a lot about the landing on the moon as being the beginning of the reconnection with the feminine, the receptive, the quality of reflection back, and that men who had now used all their technical knowledge and their sense of heroism and adventure had been the first to put their foot on that feminine orb. You could feel his excitement about the sense of the new myth, the new hero story, the new sense of journey. He even told a story, which I love, about a Russian woman who was an astronaut and who had wanted to be on that first moon landing and wasn't, since we got there first. And she was asked a question by a reporter, what would you have done if you had landed on the moon first? And she said, oh, I would have brought a dozen roses. And he was, again, so thrilled with that response, as though she knew, the feminine knew, the incredible sense of coming together of that event, a real possibility of acknowledgement of the feminine. So we are involved in the journey. We are involved in the expansion of our sense of the world, of the universe. And I think of a tape that I've heard of Russell Schweikart, who was an astronaut, who also said it very well, also in a state of tremendous excitement as he was being interviewed about his time in space. And he said something very important, first of all, that as he's looking down over the planet and sees it as a totality, as the total, as the whole venture, he wants to take a friend in either hand and say, look at that. From where I'm looking, there are no boundaries. There are no boundaries. What are we fighting over? There are no boundaries. And then he says a very interesting thing, is that for the moment of time that the camera was malfunctioning, I was able to see. And that phrase keeps coming to me frequently, because what it says to me is the minute we stop working, and that was his work, in a particular way, limiting our focus to what we can see in the camera, of our vision, of our culture, for that moment, we can rest into seeing the totality. And I believe that one of the things that is helping us all, and our children will, and are already profoundly affected by it, is the sense of the communication around the globe. Travel surely has done it for many of us already. When we get into a culture, as I was in India 6 years ago, which is 180 degrees different from our culture, one begins to see how limited one's view of many things are. The family structure, for instance, is very different in India and Nepal, in the villages. One goes down into South America, sees a very different aspect of culture, a different way of treating children. Japan, China. Each one of those instructs us about another aspect of the human possibility. It isn't that we have to adapt them immediately, but we know that that we are then living in a limited way if this other possibility is there. And that possibility also, I think, is beginning to instruct our children deeply. As the East is coming to the West, and the West is coming to the East, and we are beginning to travel, experience, know the forms of other culture, not only in space, not only geographically, but also in time. As we see on television stories of older times, primitive tribes, cultures, rituals that belong to other times. We begin also to remember some of those rituals that we have forgotten in this time, and also begin to expand our sense of the way in which we can deal with the world. So that in addition to the outer expression that comes from the inside, which I would call a creative act in general, in whatever form that creative act is expressed, it seems to me there's another large possibility for expanding our sense of the totality, and that is in space. That is to move around the globe and go backwards in time and forwards in time. The forwards in time, as I say that, is I think where you find the child mind most active. That is the forwards in time. That's where the imagination comes into play. If you watch them play mother, if you watch them play fireman, if you watch them play astronaut, if you watch them play mountain climber, you see them leading themselves forward in time with their imagination. They are masters of that. They spend a great deal of their time doing that. They almost foreshorten time. They may be 5 or 6, and you see them climbing a little hill as though they were mountain climbing, and you know they're already mountain climbers. That experience of the imagination already takes them into the physical experience that they may have when they're 30. They may never have it in actuality, but they already had it in that moment of time. They know what it's like to climb a mountain because their imagination vividly has taken them into that. So to allow the imagination its space, to turn off the camera for a moment, the work, the narrowness of focus, and allow that imagination to see future possibilities. Every invention, from the earliest primitive tool, has been created after an image. Every one. The computer is nothing more than an image of the human mind. So that we have the image, which we then can lead us forward to create something. As we image to create something outside of us in an actual manifest form, we also can image what our lives are going to be like. Not only in terms of work, but in terms of relationship, in terms of community, in terms of what the whole totality is, our explorations into space, into universe. Those are all also in the imagination. Science fiction is filled with it. Old myths are filled with it. But tap just beneath the surface of any of us, we find also that myth maker, the daydreamer in us, that is already practicing what we're going to say to the boss tomorrow, is rehearsing that. And when we know how effective that can be in really leading us forward into action, we begin to get an intimation of the possibilities of that creative aspect of ourselves, which we call imagination. The power of the image to create something for us in the future, in the next step. And I think we are finally beginning to remember how powerful that is.